Welcome to Holistic Hearts, a place to dive deeper into living holistically, a place where my mom shares thoughts on living fully, creating intentionally, and empowering others to come along with her in this journey.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Holistic Hearts. Today's episode, there's so much goodness coming up. We are talking to Cristina Emigh. She is a biblical marriage and life coach, and she is also one host of the Prickly Pear Podcast. Isn't that the cutest name ever? Alongside of her husband, Dave. And Cristina joins me today to unpack what intimacy means in our marriage. As we've been talking about pursuing connection, I thought it was a great way to really focus in on us wives and how we can bring that intimacy. She first describes in this episode an incredible and powerful testimony of how she came to know Jesus and how she ended up meeting her husband, Dave. And through their meeting each other, she discovered that years of searching for intimacy with men was actually the counterfeit of intimacy with God and with a godly man. And she really talks about what is intimacy, cultural versus biblical. And she vulnerably shares the night that she fell in love with Jesus and how she just felt pulled to discover more and more of him. We also discuss on the show what ways do we feel close to our spouse, and prayer, and how that actually is a powerful tool to bring intimacy within your marriage. And I love this one line that she says, how having unrealistic expectations breaks intimacy. And that right there is a huge nugget of truth. So if you are loving this podcast at the end, would you mind sharing it with a friend or leaving us a review on the Apple review or on Spotify? I would so appreciate it. And don't forget about all the resources that are going to be in the show notes below. I mean, how you can find out more about Cristina and her coaching. And she also has a great free resource for date night ideas that are available when you head to her website. I'll post the link below. And again, thanks for listening. I appreciate you. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Holistic Hearts. I am excited today to have Cristina Emigh, the host of the Prickly Pear Podcast, with me today. She is a biblical marriage and life coaching coach. Her and her husband do premarital counseling, and they do the life coaching, biblical marriage coaching together as well. And they live down in Arizona where it's nice and warm already there. And I just am really excited to have you get to know Cristina and to hear her story and her heart for marriages, as she is right in the thick of so many different marriages, whether they're premarital or marriages. So here we go. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, so thrilled. I would love for you to begin with just sharing your story of how you met your husband, David.
Sure. So prior to meeting Dave, I was raised in a non-religious home, and I had no faith, basically. And I ended up becoming pregnant at 17, and then ultimately marrying the father of my child. Proceeded to understand that when you get married young, you have no support or understanding of what a God honoring marriage is. He ended up being abusive, not only physically, but more so mentally and verbally abusive. I stayed in the marriage because I so desired family. And we ended up together for 10 years, off and on, separated throughout that time, and having our son, who was born when I was 17, and then my daughter, who was born when I was 23. In that time, I started to gain my independence, working all the time and trying to figure out how to save money. When I ended up leaving but I was making such bad decisions, trying to find love in all the wrong places, as the song says, and ended up basically what I thought finding intimacy was with other men constantly. So on the weekend, I would drop the kiddos off somewhere, and then I would go out and party to fulfill that desire of being wanted, cared for, loved, and finding this intimacy. And I made a series of bad decisions that ultimately affected my life for a long time. And I was on the verge of literally throwing it all away, because I couldn't see past the shame and the guilt that I was feeling in my life. And I can recall looking at the train tracks in front of my apartment and wondering what it would be like to sit on them and just ending it all, because of the shame and the guilt that I had felt from all the decisions that I've made up to that point. And so, but ultimately, even now, I can look back and see how God was sovereign and he was working in my life. And whenever I would think those thoughts, he would bring my children into my mind. Like, why would I do that? Why would I leave them? So there was a series of events that happened. And again, looking back and seeing how God worked is just incredible. So what ended up happening is I was at a point in my life where I could not stand being alone with myself or my own thoughts. I don't know if you've ever felt that way. And so I always had to have music on or the TV or something, because if I allowed myself to think of deeply, it would hurt. So I would fall asleep every night with the TV on. And before the days of watching TV on your phone or your iPad, you had to have a controller, or get up and change the channel. And my controller ended up breaking one night. And it ended on this, and a pastor who is a televangelist. And I was laying in bed and I was exhausted, and I thought to myself, he'll put me to sleep. If nothing else, he'll put me to sleep. But he was specifically speaking on the Psalms. And I remember listening to him talking about David in the Psalms. And of course, I knew who King David was, but I didn't know who King David was. And so it was entertaining. I was too tired to get up and change the channel, and I fell asleep. So the next morning, I was sitting having my coffee, and I was sitting in the living room, and ended up seeing somebody had gifted me a Bible, and it was a very pretty pink women's devotional Bible. And I had, again, no money because I was separated from my ex-husband. And so I used everything I could to decorate my little apartment to make it look pretty. So this pink Bible was sitting on my coffee table. And I thought to myself, maybe I'll use it not as a coaster this time. I'll pick it up and look. So I was looking for the Psalms, and I had no idea where they were in the Bible. so I opened it up and I found the index, and I was like, oh, there it is. And so I'm reading through some of the Psalms and I'm thinking, wow, whoever's writing this they're angry, they're happy, they're mad, they're sad, they're all over the place emotionally. And I can totally relate to that.
Yeah.
So I had that friend who had asked me several occasions to go to church with her. And so I picked up the phone and I called her and I said, hey, can you tell me about King David and the Psalms? And as you can imagine, Kristen, when you're trying to witness to somebody, you get that phone call, and she just was elated. She gave me a mini Bible study lesson on who David was and all of the things he'd been through, and how he was a man after God's own heart. And so it was a wonderful conversation. And at the end, she says, so do you want to go to church with me? I'm like, nope, but thank you. Thank you so much for that lesson. So I closed the Bible, and let me just, an aside was, during this time, I had been seeking other religions. I had been seeking different pagan religions, just different things that would fulfill me. And nothing had filled me up at all. So ultimately, after that day, it wasn't like the heavens opened up or anything like that, but I do remember looking outside the window at those same train tracks, looking past those train tracks and looking up and saying, hey, if you are really there, I need you. I can't continue this way. I felt hopeless, helpless, lost, shame, guilt, all of the things that Satan uses to keep our identity in cultural and world. So again, the heavens didn't open up, but there was a series of events that happened shortly thereafter that incident that ultimately led me to work in new home construction. And when I started that job, they told me after training, it was a wonderful job. It was paying me very well. And I was excited about the fact that I was going to be able to pay my bills and provide for my kids and all these things. And they said, the community you're going to be working at, you're going to be working with the president's son. So I need you to be on your best behavior. Well, rebellious me was like, who the heck is this guy?
Yeah.
And he puts his pants on one leg at a time like I do. So I already went into this thinking I'm going to like fight this guy, right? Because I'm super rebellious at the time. So I ended up working at this community, and he ended up being the nicest human I had ever met in my entire life. And he was just kind and gentle, and he didn't look at me like a piece of meat, because at that time, every man, was an opportunity for me to, I thought, take advantage of, but it was really me getting taken advantage of. And he was different. He didn't look at me like that. And he was very, very, very nice to me. But he was also very, what I thought, religious.
Okay.
But come to find out later on, he just had a strong faith and a strong relationship with Jesus. So ultimately, Dave, who I worked with, would end up being my husband. And it's kind of a funny story because I pursued him, and he did not want to entertain the idea of us dating. And I was just, at that point, I'm going, how could you possibly say no to me? I was like, what is happening right now? But he had his stuff going on, and he was just trying to figure out his life, and he didn't want to complicate it, but he prayed about it. And he said, all right, Lord, if I'm supposed to go on a date with her, make it clear. Lord, if as soon as we started dating, he said, Lord, if she is not going to come to know who you are, like, end it. I don't want to have anything to do with it. And our third date, he asked me to go to church with him. And it was this Baptist church. And I thought for sure there were going to be snakes and all these things going on there. But there were no snakes. It was actually the Monday, Thursday service before Easter. Okay. And that's a very intimate, it was a very intimate setting. It was probably the first expression for me of intimacy with the Lord was that night.
Wow.
Because I heard the gospel for the first time, and the way his church had presented that evening was a very intimate setting. It was violins playing, it was candles, it was soft music, it was soft lighting, and it was just beautiful. And the pastor, who knew his family, Dave's family, very well, called us all up, and I said, wait, I could take communion. I was very confused and they just called my name. He called my name. He said, Cristina, this is God's body. He sacrificed himself for you. And I remember just listening to the story of Jesus washing the feet of the disciples, another intimate act, and knowing he was going to be betrayed and still washing the feet of that disciple, and what the cross actually meant. And I had no idea. I had no idea that he was willing to stand before God for all of the things that I had done. And allow me to be clean.
Wow.
And so I sobbed. My husband said that they thought they broke me that night because I was sobbing in the chair. And that was it. That was the night that I think I fell more in love with Jesus than I did with Dave.
Yeah.
And I needed to know everything about Jesus, about God. So literally within 2 weeks, I started serving in kids ministry. And if you know anything about me now, my patience for children is nil. But I learned right along with them with Veggie Tales and all the felt stories and everything. So I learned about who Jesus was and God, and it was the best experience for me. And within a year of our first date, we were married, a year to the day. And then our relationship just continued to grow. I would say more so in the Lord. Early on in our relationship, we were both kind of, he wasn't new in his faith, but it was a renewed faith for him. And so when he was called to seminary, now keep in mind, I if there was a Bible character that I relate to, it's the woman at the well. Okay. And so keep in mind, when he was called to seminary to become a pastor, people didn't congratulate us like, oh, congratulations, Dave, that's so great. They would look at me and say, wait, you're going to be a pastor's wife? So that was
great.
that was the response.
Oh.
So, and fast forward, we've been married now 15 years. We have our children are like oatmeal, 2 from scratch and 2 instant. So I have a 30-year-old at the time of this recording, a 30-year-old, 25-year-old, 14-year-old, and 11-year-old.
Oh.
So, yeah, God's been so good and he's so gracious to us.
Yeah. Wow. What a powerful testimony. And I love that your journey started with King David and then your husband's name. Dave.
I know. Isn't that crazy? I love that too.
Yeah. Just that. What I love, because it was really his walk and his softness that drew you to know more and to not be turned off by that. There had to be something there that made you feel safe, even though he was like, I don't know if I can date you. And
exactly.
So
yeah, and that's funny that you say that, because when we talk about intimacy, as I was processing and prepping and praying for this time together with you, the Lord brought safety to my mind, like with intimacy, because I have friends that I would consider an intimate relationship with. Like one of my best friends is another pastor's wife, and we have an intimate relationship where I can share with her. And, because intimacy is not, we'll get into that, but intimacy can have, there's levels of it. But with Dave, there's this level of safety that I feel, the ability to be completely vulnerable, completely authentic, and that the bond and the intimacy that's created there is unmatched. Like you can't, it just doesn't exist other than with God.
Yeah. Wow. Well, let's talk about intimacy, because this is, so much of why I wanted you on the show, because we have been talking about pursuing connection in the podcast, and then specifically in May, really going and wanting to serve and bring wisdom to wives, women. And one of those things was to talk about intimacy within our marriage. So let's say that we're having a coaching conversation, and I come to you and I say, my husband and I are really struggling with intimacy. I can't seem to be vulnerable. I can't seem to want to be intimate with him. Can you help me out?
No, that's great. Okay. Because ultimately, our definition of intimacy varies. And what culture teaches us, what our worldly culture teaches us what intimacy is, it's equated to sex. And that's what I thought intimacy was all through, starting at age 16. I thought in order to have intimacy with someone, it meant intercourse. It meant sex. And even in the beginning of our marriage, I thought, well, I'm going to do all these things to create this mood of intimacy. And Dave was like, whoa, you don't have to do that. Like, that is not, that. So it was this reprogramming of that's not what true intimacy is. So I would say to you first, as my client, define intimacy for me. And more than likely, I actually had this conversation with somebody recently, and she said, he doesn't want to be intimate. I said, well, what does that mean to you? She said, her husband has been in an accident, and there's physical limitations right now. And she said to me, he doesn't want to be intimate. I said, well, what does that mean? She said, we can't have sex. And I said, okay, well, let's discuss that. Why do you think that means intimacy? And sometimes I have people look up the definition of intimacy because I have it up, but it's very surprising what the word intimacy means.
Let's hear it.
It means, close familiarity or friendship. Closeness. Like, it has nothing to do with sex. Close familiarity or friendship, closeness.
Wow.
So what we ended up discussing, getting her, because with coaching, it's getting you to realize, right? It's not me giving the answers. That's more of the mentorship, which I like to do. I'm like, let me tell you what to do.
I struggle with that too. I'm always like,
I know, it's like, that's not the answer.
You can do
that. So asking her ways that, and I would ask you the same thing. What are ways that you feel close to your husband? What are some ways? Give me some examples that you feel close to your husband. You could say, when we're sitting on the couch watching something that I want to watch. I mean, as simple as that. And he's laying next to me, enjoying whatever, Little House on the Prairie.
Right.
I don't know. Downton Abbey, which is something my husband watched with me. Or one of the most beautiful acts of intimacy in a relationship is praying with one another. And I'm going to give you an example of how this played out in our marriage. Okay. 3 years ago, I had something called pelvic floor dysfunction, and I didn't know what it was. I thought I had constant urinary tract infection. I thought I had, I didn't know what this was, and no doctor could help me. They're like, you're fine. I went to see a GP, a gynecologist, a urologist. Nobody could find the source of the pain. And it obviously affected our sex life because I didn't want to have sex because it hurt.
Yeah.
And come to find out, this is a whole nother podcast for you, but it's the body keeps the score. So when you're having trauma, when you have had past trauma, your body holds on to it. And if you think about there's abuse in my life on many levels, but where I was feeling stress and trauma was in my pelvic area. And it just makes sense because that's where a lot of the trauma happened in my life. Yeah. So it caught up to me. And finally going to see a pelvic floor therapist, she was able to literally work it out. And you think about a muscle, right? You have muscles in your back, and if you're tense and you have a massage therapist working out those knots, that's what she did in areas where I'm like, I don't even know how is this happening, right? I'm like, my husband doesn't even go there. Like, what's happening? But over 3 months of seeing her, and doing deep breathing exercises and understanding my body better and knowing it wasn't an internal issue. It was a muscle skeletal issue. We were able to work it out. But during that time, I couldn't have sex with Dave, and I didn't have sex. And I felt guilty. I felt like I'm not providing, there was the enemy was just coming at me. Like, I'm not a good enough wife. And, going back to the lies of, I can't provide intimacy for him. And I knew better, which is so funny how we go back to that. And so the Lord or the enemy just starts playing that. Well, what if he goes somewhere else? Like all these crazy things coming into my head. So the enemy is just going bam, bam, bam. Not only am I going to hurt you physically, but I'm going to try and affect your marriage, your, everything else.
Yeah.
But what my sweet, sweet husband did, I mean, again, because this was not a good season for us during that time. He started praying over me when I was sleeping, and I had no idea.
Oh my goodness. I have chills.
And he started praying over me when I was sleeping. And then ultimately that led to him praying over me. Like I woke up one night and he literally had because he'll sleep with his hand on me or whatever, but he had his hand on my pelvis. And he's just, I remember looking at him going, what are you doing? But he'd been tears and just praying over me that my body would heal. And I had no idea he was doing that.
Wow.
And that was probably one of the most intimate things that I have ever experienced with him in our entire marriage. And he prayed not only for healing, but he prayed for the enemy to withdraw from me, because it was clear that, the enemy was trying to get a hold of me physically, spiritually, and emotionally. So one of the most beautiful things that you can do with your spouse is praying.
Yes.
And we learned, for us, we don't do well praying at night because we're both exhausted. So praying in the morning works so well for us because we're refreshed and we can pray for our day. And we tell couples this, that there are times that I'll pray that the Holy Spirit just gives me something to pray over that Dave had no idea was going on in my heart.
Right.
And so he's able to work with that and to know how to continue to pray for me throughout the day with that instant or with that certain situation. And the same with him. If he's praying for something and I had no idea, like, I'm able to lift that up throughout the day. And there's that level of intimacy. Again, it's vulnerability. It's feeling safe. It's authenticity. It's a level of closeness. So going back to your example of coming to me, I would ask you, what are the things that make you feel close to your husband right now? So if you were to tell me that, well, when we take a walk together after dinner, that's I feel close to him. Beautiful. That's an intimate moment that you're sharing with him. We have a couple that we're working with that she is they've struggled with some things and they're building their relationship together, and they just moved back into the same room with one another. And we had to redefine intimacy for them because he wants to be intimate. He wants to have sex.
Right. Yeah.
But she's like, I feel like I'm being intimate, allowing this, him back in the bedroom. And I said, 100% you are. That's allowing the closeness to happen. And it's the language that she's using. I love that we're being intimate right now. I love that our closeness is growing, and I can't wait to express that through making love with you or making love to you when it's time, because she's still building that relationship. She's still building that trust.
Yeah.
And so to get him to understand that intimacy right now, they're experiencing that in their bedroom. It doesn't look the way he thinks intimacy should look, but they're experiencing intimacy. So he respects that and he understands that, and he's allowing the closeness to grow organically, that it'll eventually, hopefully, God willing, lead back to that relationship, that sexual relationship.
That is beautiful. I love that, redefining intimacy, and maybe even just having that conversation with your spouse of, let's talk about what intimacy is.
For sure.
I think of, of the young mom that's been touched all day, and, their needs are not being met all day. They're just giving.
Right.
And to even have that conversation with their husband who's having that bid of, hey, let's go,
yeah,
upstairs.
Yeah, I know you've been breastfeeding all day, but
yeah. But just even like coming to the same page of like, I need safety, I need vulnerability, authenticity. Like that is what I need in this moment.
And I would recommend for that mom to not talk about it during those exhaustive times. That's a date night conversation. Okay. That's a date day. That's going to the coffee shop and specifically having on the agenda, let's talk about intimacy. Because if you're doing it if you're talking about that when you're exhausted, when you've been touched all day by the kiddos, and you're pouring, your cup is it's done. It's empty.
Yeah.
What could come out in those discussions could be heated. It could be like, you don't understand me. You don't want to, you don't know what I need. And then he'll be like, well, I want to have sex with you. I want you, blah, blah. And those are not good discussions to have. That the discussion has to be on a day or a time that you're refreshed, that you don't have little kiddos, but because it is worth the investment to get a sitter, to get a friend, to get a family member, to watch the kids for an hour, for 2 hours, while you two go to the coffee shop, go to the park, it doesn't have to be this big extraordinary date, but to specifically talk about intimacy so that the needs can be met when you're available to meet them. Having these unrealistic expectations of our spouses breaks intimacy.
That's good.
It really does. I mean, because you feel like you're pulled and polarized in so many different directions, and that's not good. And we don't know what goes on with our husbands throughout the workday either. So it goes both ways. Absolutely. And if we look, going back to the Bible, going back to Genesis, we look at a very clear picture of what God intended for intimacy. He had an intimate relationship with Adam and Eve. Like, he had that. And what did Adam and Eve do? They destroyed that because they wanted control. So they destroyed the relationship of intimacy with God because they wanted control. And if we're not careful, we can do that in our marriages. Yeah. If we desire control, then we have a tendency to do that. So again, feeling that safety, feeling that authenticity, feeling that vulnerability, those are levels of intimacy that will ultimately lead to a fulfilling relationship, all aspects, not just sex. That's just a byproduct.
Yeah. Wow. This is so good. And I really just feel like we could just keep talking, and man. And I feel like maybe we should have another one coming back on, just talking about, because I know we had talked about previously about community being really important too. Yeah.
Oh my
So
gosh.
we'll come back and we'll talk about community and
I would
having
love that.
connections in that way and why it's important. But thank you so much for coming on the show,
course.
Cristina. This is your testimony is powerful. Your marriage story is powerful, and just your, you've lived out what you bring to the coaching table. So
Mhm.
if you're listening to this and you are needing biblical marriage coaching, I really encourage you to head over to the pricklypear.net and check out Cristina and her husband, Dave, and what they do over there. They do offer online coaching, and thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. I thank you so much for this platform. Thank you for how you pour your heart out to women and men. And we definitely need this community of Christian believers that are here to help and support and encourage. So thank you for what you do.
Oh, absolutely. It is a pleasure. All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Again, go find Cristina over at thepricklypear.net, and she has that wonderful podcast too, The Prickly Pear. So I will post links below and check out what she has to offer. It's amazing. So thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Holistic Hearts. As always, leave a review and don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. And if you'd like to find out more about my mom and all the things she is writing about, go to www.kristenfieldschadwick.com.